Good afternoon. In partnership with the My MTSS TA Center, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Michigan Department of Education's Diversity in Literature, the How and Why of Literacy webinar series. I am Denisha Ross Smith, Literacy Unit Manager with the Michigan Department of Education. As part of Goal 2 of Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan to improve early literacy for Michigan students, the Michigan Department of Education focuses on both the development of technical literacy skills, the how, as well as on diversity and engagement in literature, the why. Children engage more deeply with literature when they can see themselves and learn about others through text. When children engage more deeply, the power of words motivates them to read more. More reading builds greater fluency, greater vocabulary, greater background knowledge, and greater comprehension, all of which children then take to their next reading. Educators are literature advocates who know words and books matter, and we welcome each of you to today's webinar. We're so glad you're here. Before we begin, I have a few announcements to support your participation in today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Access to webinar recordings, as well as other important MDE literacy updates, will be announced through the K-12 Literacy Dyslexia Laws listserv. Please sign up for this listserv by visiting www.michigan.gov/MDE. Scroll to the bottom right of the page and enter your email where it reads, Sign up for MDE email list. Please note that participants' video, audio, and chat features have been turned off. If you would like sketches for attending today, please be sure to sign in using the Sketches link that will be provided within the first 15 minutes of this presentation. You can adjust your speaker view options at any time by selecting the View button at the top right of the Zoom window. At the conclusion of today's webinar, a survey will be provided in the chat and emailed to participants. Please share your feedback as it helps to inform future webinars. Closed captioning and an American Sign Language interpreter have been provided. If closed captioning isn't automatically visible, please select the Show Subtitle option. Our American Sign Language interpreter for today is Manda Duda. The Diversity in Literature, the How and Why of Literacy webinar series is intended to support and expand the knowledge of educators so that in turn, you may provide your students with evidence-based reading instruction and create learning environments rich in literature that engage all students, including those from different ethnicities, different religions, who speak different languages, and have different abilities. And now, to introduce today's presenters, I welcome Dr. Jennifer Saylor, Assistant Director for the Office of Educational Supports.
Thank you, Denisha. And hello, my name is Jen Saylor. I am proud to serve as an Assistant Director for the Office of Educational Supports here at the Michigan Department of Education, and I am pleased to introduce today's presenters. Katie Dennis has over 20 years of experience in education, teaching in both elementary and middle school. She specialized in teaching language arts and fostering curriculum development before joining the Michigan Department of Education literacy team in 2019. Katie has a Bachelor of Arts in K-12 education and a Master of Arts in curriculum development with an emphasis on English. Some of Katie's literacy foci are on 612 English language arts, engaging classroom libraries, professional learning for educators, curriculum-based instruction, accelerated learning, literacy coaching, and disciplinary literacy. Sandy Youngert is a literacy consultant for the Michigan Department of Education. Prior to working at MDE, Sandy worked for 20 years in the educational field as a classroom teacher, building administrator, and literacy specialist, with a strong focus on MTSS. Sandy is passionate about promoting evidence-based literacy practices and improving literacy proficiency for all learners. And now, without further delay, it is my pleasure to welcome Katie and Sandy to today's webinar.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, and welcome to the Diversity in Literature, the How and Why of Literacy webinar series. This session is on the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook, Part 1. My name is Katie Dennis, and I'm a literacy consultant with the Michigan Department of Education. Presenting with me today, I have my fellow literacy consultant, Sandy Youngert. We're so glad you've joined us for the first of 2 parts in digging deeper into the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook. At this time, the link to our MDE Dyslexia Handbook is being put into the chat so you can follow along in our virtual handbook, or perhaps if you have a physical copy of the handbook, you'd like to have that ready. Before I begin, I would like to take this time to virtually introduce our MDE literacy team. Mrs. Denisha Rawls-Smith, Ms. Missy Finnegan, Mrs. Kelly Flaminio, Mrs. Rebecca Young, and Mrs. Sandy Youngert. Everyone plays a crucial role in this work and brings true meaning to the phrase. Teamwork makes the dream work. Michigan's legislation and dyslexia work has very much been a group effort, and so I would like to acknowledge not only the MDE Literacy Unit, but also the contributions and support from State Superintendent Dr. Michael Rice, Dr. Sue Carnell, Dr. Delsa Chapman, Dr. Corinne Edwards, Dr. Jennifer Saylor, Dr. Renee Garcia, Dr. Kim St. Martin, our MI MTSS TA Center colleagues, and our senior leaders and colleagues at MDE. Thank you all. As we go through today's session, please note the items we are going to cover. We have intentionally split the topic of the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook into 2 sessions. Part 1, which an outline can be seen on the screen, and Part 2 of the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook, which will be addressed on April 3rd from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will put a registration link into the chat during this presentation. So today we will be diving into the topics of MDE strategic goals, MDE statewide literacy efforts, the purpose of the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook, the handbook overview by guided walkthrough of chapters 1 through 4, and the dyslexia definition, causes, and characteristics. Michigan's Strategic Education Plan provides focused direction to Michigan's educators and leaders in support of our over 1.4 million students. It is designed to direct and concentrate energy and resources, strengthen operations, and set success measures to ensure that all stakeholders work together towards common education goals. Michigan's Strategic Education Plan has a mission. That is to support learning and learners. Michigan's Strategic Education Plan has a vision. The vision is that every learner in Michigan's public schools will have an inspiring, engaging, and caring learning environment that fosters creative and critical thinkers who believe in their ability to positively influence Michigan and the world beyond. Our Strategic Education Plan also has 6 guiding principles. Number 1, all students have access to high-quality instruction regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, race, economic status, native language, or physical, emotional, and cognitive abilities. We want to close the student achievement and opportunity gaps that currently exist. The second guiding principle is that all educators are encouraged to be creative and innovative All educators are adequately compensated and respected for their professionalism and have the resources, support, and training needed in order to educate students. Number three, all students are encouraged to express their creativity, have voice in their own learning, feel connected to their schools, and have authentic and meaningful relationships with their educators. Number four, all students are provided every opportunity to achieve the broadest range of their life dreams. Number five, families and communities are essential partners of teachers, support staff, and administrators in the education of students. And the last one, number six, in support of students and their achievement, the Michigan Department of Education is coordinated, aligned, and properly resourced, and collaborates with school districts and a wide range of partners and stakeholders. Finally, the MDE Strategic Education Plan has 8 focused goals and metrics for each of those goals to help monitor Michigan's educational progress. The monitoring of metrics is a critical component of the MDE's vision for the future of our children's education and is therefore reviewed and reported annually. Today's information during our webinar primarily focuses on goals 2 and 5 of Michigan's Strategic Education Plan. As part of Goal 2 of Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan, which is to improve early literacy for Michigan students, the Michigan Department of Education focuses on both the how and the why of literacy to realize our vision for all Michigan learners. Additionally, as part of the Michigan Department of Education's strategic goals, today's session also aligns directly with Goal 5, which is to increase the percentage of all students who graduate from high school. As State Superintendent Dr. Michael Rice stated at the release of the Dyslexia Handbook, this handbook is an important step to help all Michigan children learn to read well, and by extension, use their education as a foundation in their lives. Together, we can help our children build the literacy foundation that they need in order to be successful, graduate, and achieve success. Regarding Goal 2 in the MDE strategic goals, which is improving early literacy, the MDE Office of Special Education and the State Systemic Improvement Plan play a role in Michigan's statewide literacy efforts by working to develop the statewide capacity to intensify literacy instruction, so tiers 2 and 3 of an MTSS framework, in order to accelerate literacy outcomes for students with disabilities and students who are reading below grade level. Supporting Michigan's students in literacy is a multifaceted approach and has been and will continue to be an ongoing process. On the screen, you can see just a few of the many statewide literacy efforts in Michigan. The MDE has made a concerted effort to ensure that these efforts align to the development of both technical literacy skills, which is the how, as well as engagement in literature, which is the why of literacy. And they can be found on our MDE Literacy website. That link should be making its way into the chat as well. The success of these efforts does not happen overnight, nor without the collaboration of multiple departments across the MDE, along with other partners, stakeholders, families, and Michigan students. Some of the statewide initiatives that align with the how and the why of literacy include accelerated learning initiatives, our Authors of Color Compendium, Diversity in Literature Symposiums, March's Reading Month initiatives, Michigan Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant, Diverse Classroom Libraries Guidance Document, Promising Practices Exchange, and continuing on with highlighting Michigan's statewide literacy efforts, We have the Read by Grade 3 law. We have essential instructional practices in literacy, the MDE coaching model, the My MTSS TA Center, and the MTSS practice profile, language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling, otherwise known as letters, family engagement centers through MyLeap, and 35M, 35N, and PAs 146 and 147, all contributing to the how and the why of literacy in the state of Michigan. In keeping statewide literacy efforts at the forefront of our work at the MDE, the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook was developed in collaboration of over 100 birth through 12 educators, administrators, dyslexia experts, special education experts, legislators, the Michigan MTSS TA Center, families, communities, and other stakeholders from Michigan and across the nation. All of this collaboration in order to assist educators and leaders in developing a shared understanding of the best practices to prevent and address reading difficulties associated with the primary consequences of dyslexia. Also, to provide and help implement assessment practices. Those assessment practices are needed to inform instruction and intervention for learners with dyslexia characteristics. And finally, to cohere statewide literacy efforts that support our educators' use of practices that are aligned with reading science, based on scientifically informed theories in order to accelerate reading outcomes for all of our learners. Let's take a moment to see the layout of the Dyslexia Handbook. It's important to note that the Dyslexia Handbook is divided into chapters. Within each chapter is the content for that chapter. You will also find action steps in addition to a more information section, which can be found at the end of each chapter. The action steps suggest how educators and leaders may act upon the handbook information for that chapter. You can think of them as immediate steps that you can take and take back to your professional developments. Take them back to your staff meetings, your PLCs, your fellow educators, and your school and district leaders today. As mentioned, the Dyslexia Handbook is divided into chapters, and the chapters of the handbook are as follows. Chapter 1 is the purpose. Chapter 2, the introduction. Chapter 3, understanding dyslexia. Chapter 4, reading science. Chapter 5, multi-tiered systems of supports, a framework to meet the individual needs and assets of the whole child. Chapter 6, professional learning and implementation supports, what districts can do. And Chapter 7, eligibility for special education services. Please note that our webinar on the Dyslexia Handbook Part 2 on April 3rd will cover Chapters 5 through 7. So let's take a look inside Chapter 1, which is the purpose. Feel free to continue following along with your physical or virtual copy of the Dyslexia Handbook. Chapter 1 dives into the foundational knowledge needed in order to best understand the purpose in creating the Dyslexia Handbook. As a reminder, this handbook is designed to help educators and district and school leaders develop a shared understanding of best practices to prevent reading difficulties associated with the primary consequences of dyslexia. Please note this is not a diagnostic tool for dyslexia. The Dyslexia Handbook is also designed to help educators and leaders implement assessment practices that are needed to inform the provision of instruction. Also, the handbook provides suggestions and ideas for intervention methods for learners with dyslexia. Overall, Chapter 1 of the Dyslexia Handbook defines terminology, explains critical concepts, and suggests additional resources for more information related to understanding dyslexia and related to reading science, related to supporting literacy acquisition within a multi-tiered system of supports framework, professional learning and implementation supports for educators and leaders, and special education eligibility and services. This screen shows part of Chapter 1 that outlines the definition we will be referring to throughout the Dyslexia Handbook. For years, the MDE has engaged in conversations with legislators, families, guardians, dyslexia experts, researchers, and other stakeholders in order to discuss how to increase dyslexia understanding and outline the instructional practices and supports needed for learners with characteristics of dyslexia. The International Dyslexia Association and the National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development define dyslexia as a specific learning disorder that is neurobiological in origin, characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition, and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities, even though educators have provided effective classroom instruction. It is also good to note that this specific reading disorder may include secondary consequences. These secondary consequences may present as problems in reading comprehension, a reduced reading experience. Both can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge and ultimately lead to social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. Additionally, the terms dyslexia and word-level disability are used interchangeably. If you're following along in the Dyslexia Handbook, either virtually or in person, you will see that while there are no action steps for Chapter 1, we highly encourage you to read through the entire chapter frequently, annotate important concepts in order to create talking points among your colleagues and leaders. At this time, we will transition into Chapter 2, which is the introduction. The premise of this chapter is to discuss the fact that every child and adolescent is entitled to educational experiences that prepare them for lifelong learning success. And I'm going to say it again. The premise of this chapter is to discuss the fact that every child and adolescent, every one of them, is entitled to educational experiences that prepare them for lifelong learning success. As you go through the Dyslexia Handbook, you'll see that it reaches far beyond the individual classroom. As educators, our goal is to produce lifelong learners who can achieve their goals. We want them to live a productive life and function as global citizens. And this all starts with quality education, steeped in evidence-based practices. Not receiving quality literacy instruction aligned to reading science is detrimental to a learner's ability to achieve their educational goals. The MDE is committed to ensuring Michigan educators have the knowledge and resources necessary to implement equitable instruction for all students. Equitable instruction for all students, inclusive of their varying abilities. Chapter 2 also highlights that the implementation supports to prevent literacy-related difficulties and accelerate literacy outcomes for all learners, including children and adolescents with characteristics of dyslexia and specific reading or writing disabilities, are operationalized in a multi-tiered system of support framework. That's an MTSS framework. The MDE is responsible for compliance with state and federal regulations and educational laws, in turn providing guidance to educators and educational leaders in understanding the regulations and laws, in addition to implementing them. Throughout this presentation, we will discuss how to operationalize the process of implementing high-quality literacy instruction within the MTSS framework. As Chapter 2 ends, you will notice important, explicit calls to action. These are the right now action steps mentioned earlier in the presentation. These action steps are, number 1, develop a plan for how to increase a shared understanding. And I emphasize the word shared. A shared understanding of the best practices for preventing reading difficulties that are associated with the primary consequences of dyslexia. So, a word level reading disability. Among educators and district and school leaders, we want you to have that shared understanding for best practices. The second action step here is identify a group of individuals who will read the Dyslexia Handbook together and discuss strategies for incrementally orienting people to its contents for the purpose of designing a plan for developing educator expertise. Again, the purpose is to design a plan for developing educator expertise. We want to prevent reading difficulties and to provide high-quality reading intervention supports that result in accelerating literacy outcomes for all of our students. And finally, to gain a deeper knowledge and explore resources pertaining to Chapter 2, you can navigate through the websites listed on the screen and are making their way into the chat. We suggest exploring our website that hosts the Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan. We suggest visiting our MDE's literacy webpage and also visiting the Michigan Multi-Tiered System of Supports TA Center, or MI MTSS. At this time, I'm going to pass the presentation on to my colleague, Sandy Youngert, to cover what lies within Chapters 3 and 4 of the Dyslexia Handbook. Sandy?
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandy Youngert, and I'm a literacy consultant alongside Katie in the Office of Educational Support's Literacy Unit here at the MDE. And today I'll be walking you through Chapters 3 and 4 of the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook. Now, just as a reminder, we'll continue this session 1 week from today, same time, same place, as we cover Chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the Dyslexia Handbook and discuss how they relate to Public Acts 146 and 147, the K-12 literacy and dyslexia laws. So moving on to Chapter 3, this chapter helps us further our understanding of dyslexia, and it covers things like the causes of dyslexia, the potential for dyslexia to co-occur with other disorders, as well as addressing some myths and facts about dyslexia. Now, as Katie discussed earlier, dyslexia is a specific learning disorder that's neurobiological in origin, meaning it's caused by differences in the structure and the functioning of the brain, and this affects how a person processes language, particularly when reading and spelling. So the regions affected would be those of language, sound manipulation, orthographic mapping, automaticity in recognizing words. Now, these regions are vital for developing proficient reading skills. Research informs us that dyslexia is actually an issue with language processing of phonemes in the brain, not visual processing. So, as you can see on this slide, there are also genetic factors associated with dyslexia. Now, this points to the importance of using multiple data sources, such as adding in a family history questionnaire coupled with the assessment data that you already use to determine how we can best meet the individual needs of our learners. We'll dig deeper into individualized instruction next week as we discuss how to meet the needs of learners within the MTSS framework. Now, the good news is that with all the information and the research that we have today, we know what to do. For example, we know that structured literacy lessons, which incorporate explicit, systematic, and cumulative instruction, can actually change the brains of our dyslexic readers to resemble those of learners without dyslexia. The slide you see now shows the brain activation patterns of two readers. The image on the left represents that of a person with dyslexia. The image on the right, that of a typically developing reader. Now, you can see that the areas of the brain being activated during reading are basically opposite between these two readers. Our typically developing reader is using those areas of the brain that correspond to phoneme-grapheme association and phonological processing, orthographical processing, and they're using this to make meanings of words as they read and write. The other image shows that for a reader with dyslexia, they aren't engaging those areas as much, and instead, they're relying on other areas of the brain to compensate. So our dyslexic learners are actually trying to read by using strategies other than tending to letters and sounds. Chapter 3 of your Dyslexia Handbook also contains this dyslexia myths versus facts infographic, and it's an excerpt from the National Center on Improving Literacy. And it's here to clear up some common misconceptions. Some of the myths still out there today are things like dyslexia is a reading order that's based in vision problems, and it causes people to read backward or mix up B and D. Now we know research shows us that dyslexia is a brain-based disorder, and it's associated with impairments in the brain regions that are associated with manipulations of sounds, not vision. Another myth still out there is that people with dyslexia can't learn to read. Again, research dispels this. It shows that with the proper academic support, people with dyslexia can learn to read and read proficiently at that. So, as I stated earlier, we know what to do to help our learners with dyslexia, but there are still myths out there that we need to dispel. As educators, it's important that we clarify these misconceptions so we can provide correct information to all stakeholders and provide our students with the supports that they need to be successful. I encourage you to go back and look over this infographic on your own and think about how you might address some of these common myths. The action steps in Chapter 3 begin with a call to familiarize yourself with the content of the chapter, to think about alignment with current laws, and in this case, here in Michigan, that would be Public Acts 146 and 147, the K-12 literacy and dyslexia laws, and how this knowledge might correlate to professional learning opportunities with your staff or with your colleagues. The other two action steps go on to encourage using the resources at the end of Chapter 3. Now, these can be found on page 6 of the printed copy of the Dyslexia Handbook, or page 10 if you're in the e-version. So due to our limited time together, today's webinar is a very high-level overview of this information. So please know there's tremendous value in going back to read over this chapter yourself, or better yet, with your colleagues, and accessing all these additional resources that are available to you. Chapter 4 of the Dyslexia Handbook covers reading science. This is also known as the science of reading, and this is the final portion that we're going to discuss in today's session. So what is the science of reading? The science of reading is the accumulated evidence from over 50 years of gold standard studies that reveal the cognitive processes that are essential for reading proficiency. It includes research from a variety of disciplines, including things like cognitive development, educational psychology, implementation science, linguistics. It encompasses studies that have been conducted on tens of thousands of children and adults in multiple countries, in multiple languages, and this encompasses studies done on both readers and non-readers. And it informs how proficient reading and writing develop, why some people have difficulty with this, and how we can most effectively assess and teach. The evidence identifies specific instructional practices that are most effective for developing strong readers and writers. By implementing professional practices informed by this science, we can improve student outcomes. Now, in your handbook on pages 8 and 9, or 12 and 13 if you're in the e-version, you'll find this graphic, and it outlines how the areas of the brain, the left hemisphere of the brain, work together as we read and write. Now, keep in mind, while speaking is a natural process, reading is not. Our brains are hardwired to communicate through speaking and listening, but reading and writing are actually fairly new inventions in human evolution. Now, today, we're fortunate to have a literal map of the processes that must occur in the brain to learn to read. And these processes continue to occur even with proficient readers. So I want to point out that it's numbered 1 through 5, but that's not because this is necessarily a linear process. It's more for identification purposes as we're having this discussion. So when we learn to read, number 1 indicates that the print we see travels to the back of the brain, to the occipital lobe, and this is where the brain sees letters and letter patterns of written words. Next, the information travels to various regions, and this includes the frontal lobe. And number 2, this is where the speech sound system is housed. Number 3 identifies the angular gyrus, and that's that bridge you see going across the top there, and it connects the frontal and the occipital lobes. Now, this is where the connection between letters and sounds occurs. So when a child receives explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, in phonics, and in decoding skills, it increases that activation pattern between these 3 parts of the brain, and it really creates automatic communication. And this is vital for proficient reading skills. Number 4 indicates that visual word form area, and this is also called the brain's letterbox. And this is because it helps form memory traces of words and of specific letter strings. So what I mean by that is that when we're creating automaticity between those first 3 areas of the brain that we talked about, a memory trace for words and the specific letter combinations in those words begins to form, and this is where it's housed. Now, this allows for automaticity in reading, and it really allows us to read words as if we're reading them by sight, creating just instant and effortless recognition of the words we see in print. So this means that sight word learning is based on phonemic awareness, phonics, and spelling skills, and not on visual memory. Now, the last area, Wernicke's area, is located within the temporal lobe, and this is where we process and understand spoken language. Okay, so all 5 of these areas are working together when we read and when we write. And the beauty of knowing this is it pinpoints where we need to focus instruction and how we can best provide specific interventions when children are struggling. So this was a lot of information on one slide. I'm going to pause here for just a moment to let you know about a great opportunity that's coming your way. You're going to want to mark your calendars for May 15th because our own Dr. Kim St. Martin, who is the director of the Michigan MTSS Technical Assistance Center, and she's one of the lead authors of this dyslexia handbook that we're discussing today. Dr. St. Martin is going to be the keynote speaker in our 4th Diversity and Literature webinar series, and she'll be presenting on the reading brain. So next, we want to focus your attention on a way to organize our understanding as educators of how students actually learn to read and write. The graphic you see is, it's called the Simple View of Reading, and it's a theoretical model designed by Goff and Tunmer, and it states that reading comprehension is the product of printed word recognition and language comprehension. Now, since this is a multiplication problem, it really shows that a deficit in either of the domains has an overall negative effect on reading comprehension. For example, if a child struggles with word recognition but has excellent language comprehension, that would still have a negative impact on their overall reading comprehension. So to put it in mathematical terms, if they're at 75% with word recognition, 0.75, but 100% with language comprehension, 0.75 times 1 is still 0.75. So this multiplication sign also means that at no point in the developmental learning progression would instruction focus solely on one of the two parts. Now, while one side may have more emphasis and does have more emphasis at certain stages of development than the other side, good instruction must effectively integrate both the word recognition components and the language comprehension components as opposed to selecting one over the other. This knowledge helps strengthen instructional and intervention practices, as well as pinpoint areas for intervention. Now, while the simple view of reading is simple, of course, we know that reading is indeed a very complex process. What you see on your screen now is a graphic of the reading learning progression, and it's based on Dr. Scarborough's model of the reading rope. And this can be found in Chapter 4 of your Dyslexia Handbook. So while that simple view of reading gives us the big picture, the reading learning progression captures the complexity of learning to read and helps us understand the learning progression as we work to develop skilled readers. It consists of 3 overall domains. At the top, you'll see those word recognition strands, and they incorporate skills such as phonological awareness, decoding, print concepts, and these skills work together as a reader develops accuracy, fluency, and automaticity through direct instruction, repetition, and much practice. Concurrently, the language comprehension strands, and that's that section in the middle, incorporates things like background knowledge, oral language, and cognitive skills like making inferences. And those skills all reinforce one another, and then they weave together with the word recognition strands at the top to produce a skilled reader. At the bottom, you see the reading comprehension strand, and this shows how a reader progresses from listening to reading comprehension and all the various skills like, developing knowledge of different text structures, syntax, learning to monitor their own comprehension, all those skills that are developing. Now, it's important to notice, this doesn't happen overnight. It requires instruction and much practice over time. And you'll see that the reading learning progression actually represents grades spanning from pre-K up to grade 12. Now, I also want to direct your attention to the gray bars that you see correlated with each strand. And they represent an estimate for when typical learners master these skills or when instruction occurs. So remember how the simple view of reading is multiplicative. So a deficit in either area creates an overall deficit in comprehension, right? So this graphic reinforces that concept. And research shows that weakness in one domain cannot be compensated for with strength in another. So within each domain, if skills are weak or even missing, it affects the overall integrity of that rope as a whole. Now, as I mentioned with the simple view of reading, depending on the reading stage, one domain may get a higher emphasis, but both should be taught. So what might this look like? Let's think about a first grade student. At this developmental stage, most of the students are focusing on gaining independence within that word recognition domain. And when they read, they're using much of their available cognitive workspace solely on decoding. Now, this is where the teacher can step in and do the heavy lifting with development of those language comprehension skills. So, for an example, they can incorporate read alouds to work to develop those areas represented within that language comprehension portion. So by taking the cognitive workload of decoding off the student's shoulders for some of this work, it still enables the children to develop those higher level language comprehension skills just at a deeper level and using more complex text than they could read independently. And of course, this would look very different, for example, in sixth grade. In that case, you would expect to see less of an emphasis on that word recognition strand, because at this point, our proficient readers, they've developed a large repertoire of known words. So, maybe you're focusing on skills like affixes or Greek and Latin roots. But these students, by and large, would be able to read more complex text independently. So the bigger emphasis at this grade level would be on developing high-level comprehension skills. But I'll say, regardless of the grade level that you're working with, it's so important to know all that goes into becoming a proficient reader, because we all know that students walk through our doors with varying levels of ability, and we want to be able to provide the resources and the supports that they need. So taking our knowledge from the reading rope, let's look at a practical example of this using the simple view of reading. So imagine a beginning kindergarten student, and we know that language comprehension times word recognition equals reading comprehension. So we have a student entering kindergarten, and they come with the grammar skills that they've developed up to this point. They come with their personal, expressive, and receptive vocabulary, and they come with their own background knowledge. And certainly this will vary from child to child. Now, in kindergarten, the word recognition focus would be on teaching how print represents sound. We have research that shows us what we need to assess and how to interpret those assessments to determine where we should focus our instruction for that particular child. And we can really tailor it to their specific needs. On page 15 of your Dyslexia Handbook, or page 19 if you're in the e-version, you'll find a chart that outlines characteristics of dyslexia. It's broken down into three bands: preschool, kindergarten through grade 3, and grades 4 through 12. And that final 4 through 12 grade band, we actually classify that as our adolescent readers. I recommend taking the time after this webinar to really look over that chart. PA 146 uses the term characteristics of dyslexia throughout the legislation. So this is important to know. Now, some of the K3 or early elementary characteristics of dyslexia are bulleted here on this slide. So for example, we want to watch for learners in these early grades who confuse letters whose sounds are similar, or maybe they're repeatedly misspelling words even after those letter sound combinations have been explicitly taught. And even in those early grades, we may start to see some social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties begin to emerge. For example, we might see learners who avoid reading and reading activities like, reading intervention or class-wide instructional activities. Now, our adolescent grade band level, again, that's grades 4 through 12, that's what encompasses here. Some examples of dyslexia characteristics here might include difficulties reading and spelling multisyllabic words, Now, this is going to lead to challenges in understanding the text that we're asking them to read in class. Remember back to that reading rope and how when that cognitive desktop space is consumed with decoding, there really just isn't enough mental capacity left to focus on comprehension. So even though these children might have the ability to understand the concepts they're learning about, they don't have the skills to decode the text. We might also see children with a limited vocabulary because a robust vocabulary is developed through a wide array of reading experiences. And of course, here too, we also can see those social, emotional behavior factors begin to emerge. And, we might notice that children start to develop a low self-esteem or even act out to avoid reading activities. Now, keep in mind, we know what needs to occur within the brain to develop proficient reading skills. So knowing these characteristics of dyslexia, basically knowing these red flags or these signs to watch for, that enables us and really strengthens us as educators so we can provide the proper supports and interventions for our students. Let's take another look at the reading brain and how this information correlates with current legislation. Now, you've seen the skills needed for strong reading comprehension represented by the 2 factors of the simple view of reading, and then broken down even further in the reading rope. And we've also looked at some of the characteristics of dyslexia to watch for in our students. So how does this translate into effective teaching? Well, structured literacy incorporates the structure of our language system coupled with effective delivery systems. And this is called out explicitly in PA 146. So structured literacy, as written in Public Act 146, is defined as systematic, direct, explicit, cumulative, and diagnostic instruction that integrates listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and emphasizes the structure of language across the speech sound system, which is phonology, the writing system, orthography, the structure of sentences, syntax, the meaningful parts of words, morphology, the meanings of words, phrases, sentences, and the text, which is semantics, and the processing of oral and written discourse. Now, within that definition, systematic means following that logical order of language and moving from the most basic concepts to the more advanced. In the definition, explicit means direct and deliberate instruction through continuous pupil-teacher interaction that includes explanation, teacher modeling or examples, and multiple opportunities to practice with feedback so that as students work to develop mastery. So it's that gradual release of responsibility model. I do, we do, you do. And as an aside here, keep in mind, this explicit instruction lends itself well to providing our students with explicit feedback. Now, the diagnostic instruction referred to in the definition means continuous assessment and individualization of instruction to meet each pupil's individual needs. And cumulative means the practice of basing new concepts on those previously learned and maximizing retention of concepts through regular systematic review so students can gain automaticity and fluency. So chapter 4 ends with 5 action steps, asking us to read through chapter 4, introduce educators and leaders to the definition of the science of reading, and educate ourselves about the SS standards of evidence, which help us understand how in the absence of evidence-based practices that are informed by scientific theory are appropriate to use. Number 2, support understanding of the reading brain to recognize and support understanding of why the K-12 literacy and dyslexia laws focus on the importance of using a code emphasis approach in structured literacy. Number 3, discuss the evidence for the constructs within that simple view of reading. Number 4, use the reading learning progression to help teachers and leaders understand reading acquisition across preschool through 12th grade. And finally, number 5, discuss the potential characteristics of dyslexia and how effective prevention and intervention efforts can change the reading reading trajectory. I can't get that word out today for learners. Next week, we'll cover chapters 5, 6, and 7 in the Dyslexia Handbook and discuss the necessary components of a healthy MTSS framework and how this relates to PA 146 and 147. We'll also talk about high-quality professional learning and highlight some free learning opportunities that are available to you now. We'll close out the handbook portion with an overview of the special education process. So thank you for attending part 1 of the Dyslexia Handbook overview. If you'd like additional information or have questions for us, please don't hesitate to reach out at mde-literacy-dyslexia@michigan.gov. We hope to see you next week for part 2 of the Michigan Dyslexia Handbook, where we'll cover our final 3 chapters. You'll see a registration link in the chat, as well as a link for a feedback form for today's session. So these webinars are a new venture for our team, and we want to continue to improve. So your feedback is so important to us. If you're able to take these last few minutes and fill that out, we'd be very grateful and promise to look over every response. Thank you again for attending and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Katie and Sandy, for sharing your knowledge with us for today's webinar. Your work is important to Michigan's educators and leaders as it truly supports literacy teaching and learning throughout Michigan classrooms. We sincerely appreciate you creating the presentation in support of our efforts here at the Michigan Department of Education. Thank you to the MDE and MI MTSS TA Center team for their work in moving the Diversity in Literature webinar series forward. And thank you to our attendees for listening and learning with our team throughout today's session. Dr. Rice reminds us that educators are literature advocates who know words and books matter. We're proud to support the full range of our diverse 1.4 million plus students in Michigan public schools and help them navigate their increasingly diverse world. The diversity of Michigan students compels educators to focus on both the how and the why of literacy because words matter, voices too. To continue your literacy learning with us, please plan to join us for future Diversity in Literature, the how and the why of literacy webinars. Coming up, we are pleased to present the Dyslexia Handbook Part 2. This session will be presented on April 3rd, 2025 from 4 to 5 p.m., and the registration link can be found in the chat. Thank you all for joining us today and the work that you do for Michigan students. Please make sure to complete the survey for this event that can be found in the chat and will be emailed to you when today's webinar is officially closed. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.